Hello and welcome to a podcast about something. Today we've got a podcast about Spider-Man, and I've got Kemet from the FYMP podcast here with me today. Kemet, you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself and about your podcast?
Sure. My name's Kemet, as you said. We have a podcast called the FYMP podcast, and on it we talk about all types of stories and fiction, things that are important to us. A strong angle towards comic books and sci-fi, but really we run the gamut and basically talk about what those stories mean in our lives. But one of my favorite things in the world is Spider-Man, so I'm really glad to be here to talk to you about it.
Spider-Man is also one of my favorite things in the world, and I've been circling Spider-Man topics for a while, so I'm glad we're just going to kind of cover the gamut of everything Spider-Man today, and then maybe at a later date go more in depth on other things.
Awesome, love it.
Like you said, you guys cover all types of fiction, and I've listened to a few of your episodes. It's a really great show
Hey, thank you.
because you take fiction and look at it in a different way. You break it down and really think about fiction and what the stories are trying to tell. I've listened to the epic book series, Why They Keep Getting Worse. I listened to that episode,
Uh-huh.
and I've listened to. I'm trying to look through your list right now to remember. Oh, the Unbreakable and Split.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah.
Yep, because that's one of my favorite. Kind of outside. That's one of the universes that was created that nobody saw coming. That it was out there.
Yeah, that it was going to be a shared universe. That was surprising to me too.
Yeah, and I really like those movies. I saw Split before I saw Unbreakable, and then once I saw Split, but I knew what Unbreakable was, and I knew the twist of it and everything, because 15 years after
Hmm.
an M. Night Shyamalan movie had come out, everyone knows the twist already, anyways.
Yeah,
So
of
it wasn't
course.
like it ruined the movie for me, but so it was cool that Split was in that universe, and that made me now want to go back to Unbreakable and find out more about that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would love to pick your brain at some other time about what you thought watching it in that order because I watched it in kind of chronological order and I feel like it
Mm.
would have a very different feel, but interesting.
Yeah, I could imagine because me and my wife went to see Split, and we weren't expecting it to be related to Unbreakable in any way. We expected it to be about multiple personalities,
Hmm.
and it wasn't,
Yeah,
or it was, but it wasn't.
right, right.
So it was interesting. And yeah, we can go into that deeper some other time.
Cool.
But yeah, really great show. Make sure you check them out. They're on all the top podcasting places. Do you have Twitter, Facebook, anything like that?
We do, yeah. You can find us on both of those at FYMPcast.
Okay, great. Check them out and listen to interesting takes on all types of fiction. And we're gonna get into Spider-Man here.
Yeah, let's do it.
So the first thing about Spider-Man is he's a lot of people's favorite superhero. I've noticed.
Mm.
What makes him your favorite comic book slash movie superhero?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think there's a lot of things about Spider-Man that could make a character someone's favorite. But I think as I've gotten older, because he was my favorite hero even when I was a little kid. I think back then I wasn't quite realizing why I thought it was so important. Back then I thought it was the fact that he was so acrobatic, which I thought was really cool. The way he
Yeah,
moved, and then the fact that he's also hilarious. Like I mean, as a kid especially, he was just like one of the funnier heroes out there. He was always cracking jokes, making
yeah,
light of
that's
even
always good in a hero.
yeah, totally, making light of even the most serious situations.
There's
It's
a
kind of
reason nobody likes Cyclops.
right? Exactly. Yeah, it's goody two shoes. It's kind of like those Captain America characters. They serve a purpose, but they're not the most entertaining to read.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I'm coming from kind of the same place growing up. I would watch the cartoons, and I played some video games featuring Spider-Man, but at that time, video games weren't very in depth. Like you couldn't get the wisecracking Spider-Man in a video game. You were lucky that he was on a screen, basically.
yeah,
And I read some comics as a kid, not very many, but I would always go for the Spider-Man comics. Where I lived, we didn't have a comic book store, but the grocery store would often have um, Spider-Man comics because this was the mid '90s, and Spider-Man kind of had a resurgence right then.
yeah, totally.
So it was pretty easy to find some of those comics, and so I just fell in love with the character, and like you said, his acrobaticness, and then he's got the super speed, he's got super strength, all the kind of basic superpowers, but then he goes one up on those with the sticking to the walls and the webbing and all that kind of stuff.
Right, right. And the other thing is his powers are kind of within reason. He's like
Hmm.
he's more powerful than like a Daredevil, like other street level characters, but he's not as powerful as your your Superman type characters, these guys who just have outlandish powers and they're invulnerable. So I think what I was going to get around to was the fact that I think it's his relatability, as far as the fact that he was Peter Parker, just an average high school kid, and also the fact that he wasn't invulnerable, socially and physically. He was like, he could be hurt. And that kind of made him a lot more interesting than a lot of other characters, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk about this a little more when we get into, we're going to kind of break it down by movies, animated shows, comics here.
Mhm.
So when we get to the comics part, we'll talk about this a little more. But I've started actually going back in the Marvel Entertainment app or the Marvel Universe app, whatever it's called,
Uh,
and reading, just starting from the beginning, reading all of Spider-Man.
that's,
So
that's
there are,
ambitious.
yeah, I'm like halfway through the 70s right now.
Okay.
And it's interesting how many times like they have to make him sick or injure him in some way to kind of bring him down to the level they need him to be at.
Hmm.
Just because he at full strength, he could take down a lot of these bigger villains, but a lot of times they, to make him more relatable, like you were saying, they give him these vulnerabilities, sickness, injuries,
Hmm.
um, personal issues, and lack of sleep, things like that that he has to fight against along with the villains.
Totally. Yeah. They really put him through the ringer, and I guess it is to bring him down to like a more relatable level, like to kind of make him somebody that you can relate to because you're not always at your best.
Right. And as Peter Parker, Peter Parker was created and he's one of the most relatable people for kids who read comic books at the time he was created and the time I was a kid. Like for nerds who want to read comic books,
Mhm.
that's what you want to see in them. You want to see a reflection of yourself, and that's kind of what Peter Parker was.
Totally, yeah. And he's also really aspirational. I mean, he's one of those
Hmm.
characters that even more so than some of the others where they always do the right thing, but they're kind of goody two shoes about it. Peter's that way, but he's also, he it shows real effect on his life when he does the right thing. So like his social life is always falling apart. Like his personal life is in disarray. It's because he can't stop doing the right thing in other areas of his life, and he continues to do it even though that's the case. And that's always been kind of inspirational to me.
Right, and with him, it's not like like you said, it's not like Captain America where this is the right thing. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to do
Mhm.
the right thing. I'm going to do the right thing. It's always in reading the comics. I've realized this. He has this inner turmoil about everything,
Yeah.
about each decision he makes. He kind of thinks both sides of it, and after he makes the right decision, he'll go back and say, well, maybe I shouldn't have done that,
Right.
because now Mary Jane's in trouble or whatever.
Right. Right.
He always reflects on the ramifications of the decisions he makes, and that's something that like Captain America doesn't necessarily do. He'll make the right decision because he knows it's the right decision,
Yeah. Totally.
and you're just supposed to take him at his word because he's Captain America. Same with Superman.
Yep.
So Spider-Man again is more relatable in that way, and I think that's the relatability is a big reason why people kind of flock to Spider-Man and why he's a lot of people's favorites.
Yeah, I totally agree. He's kind of the everyman, but with the powers.
Yeah, and with really cool power. Like those are some
That's
powers I wouldn't mind being stuck with.
easily the number one power set that I'd take if you gave it to me. Like it's probably that or Wolverine. I mean,
I kind of I like the super speed, like the Flash super speed, where I can travel through time
mhm.
and all that. But I think Spider-Man and then Flash is how I would go.
I feel you on that. That's a whole bag of worms for me. Like I would want that, but I also would be terrified of it. I
Oh
like
yeah,
I like the super speed that Spider-Man has, where it's like he's faster than every normal human, but not so fast that he's gonna damage the time stream.
yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. I like Green Lantern too. I'm looking at my wall, just kind of seeing all the different. I like Green Lantern with the power ring too, but a lot of responsibility comes with that. So
True,
I don't
true.
know that I'd like all that. I don't
Yeah,
know that I want to protect the whole universe. I just want to make cool things out of my hand.
right, right. I'm not sure I have the willpower for it either.
That's true. You gotta have strong willpower. All right, so do we want to move into let's talk about movie appearances.
Yeah, let's do it.
And we'll kind of just do them, I guess, chronologically. So we'll talk about the Raimi trilogy, then the Amazing trilogy, and now the MCU. So let's start with out of them all, what is your favorite version of Spider-Man and favorite version of Peter Parker?
Ooh, okay. That's a two-part question. That's good.
Yeah,
I would actually say that
we bring the hard stuff here.
yeah, I like it. Um, my favorite version of Spider-Man, I would say, is Spider-Man from Spider-Man 2, which
Okay,
I also think is my favorite of all the movies where he's been featured. Um, it
it's
just
definitely the best movie.
yeah, I think so. He really kind of captured they really did a good job of capturing the essence of who Spider-Man was without having to do the origin story that everybody's seen a lot of times by now. But they really kind of captured what makes the character important or special and interesting, and the animation. I mean, that was the first time you'd ever seen Spider-Man do that kind of stuff, and they did it so well. It stands up even now, I think.
Oh yeah, I will go back and watch the Raimi trilogy before I'll watch Amazing Spider-Man
Hmm.
1 and 2. But
Yeah.
I like Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2.
Hmm.
Um, but the Raimi trilogy's way better, and I'm with you on that. The Tobey Maguire Spider-Man is better, but I think my favorite Peter Parker is the current one in the MCU with Tom Holland.
Yeah, I'd agree. That was good. That's what I was going to say about my favorite Peter Parker is definitely Tom Holland. Yeah.
Because putting him in high school is the place he's supposed to be, and I think that's what the MCU got right. And he's just like this kid that's completely out of his depth,
Yeah.
fighting with all these real superheroes, and you can really see that in the way Tom Holland delivers it.
Yeah, he's out there with the gods, like fighting with them, and he's just this high school kid. I really think they did a great job in his, in Homecoming, and then also in his MCU
Hmm.
appearances. They really driven that home, but then also made him very heroic and like as a stand up as a character.
Yeah, just real quick, requisite spoiler warning for
Mm.
pretty much all of the MCU, any other Spider-Man film, animated series, video game, really anything involving Spider-Man, there will be spoilers, and then also for anything going on in the MCU, probably.
Yeah, that's a large spoiler alert. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So turn it off now if you haven't seen, if you care to see any of that. Um, so yeah, let's talk about the Raimi trilogy. This came out, when did the first movie come out? 2000, 2001?
Yeah, yeah. It was actually my I was in college and it came out in 2001. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're a little bit older than I am. I was in middle school when it came out, and
Okay.
it was so cool for me to finally see Spider-Man on the big. Like there had been the Batman movies, there had been a couple. The first X-Men movie had come out, but like Spider-Man in a movie theater,
Hmm.
done as perfectly as you could do him at the time,
Yeah.
was just amazing to see.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, even as a college student, it blew my mind. I mean, I'd spent my childhood years. I grew up in New York, and so I was always leaning out the car window, looking up to see like, oh, where am I going to web swing today? So when I got to see, the Spider-Man, the first movie, I was actually, it was actually sold out, and I had to buy a ticket for like some movie with Sandra Bullock where she pretends to be a like debutante, but she's an FBI agent.
Miss Congeniality.
Yeah, exactly. And I bought a
That's the
ticket for
one.
that and went over to see Spider-Man instead with my sister and a friend. And we got
It's
out of the
probably a good
theater.
choice.
Yeah, oh, yeah, definitely. We got out of the theater and I was like trying to like wipe away my tears before we get out of the dark theater because it was just like so impactful. So it was so cool.
Oh, the ending of that movie was great too. With he couldn't be with, he made the responsible decision not to be with Mary Jane
Hmm.
to keep her safe, and yeah, I could see how that was a tearjerker. That's a funny story because when I went to see, it was the second Matrix movie, which
Hmm.
people are indifferent on, whatever. But I wasn't 17 yet, so we had to sneak in using tickets to X-Men 2,
Hmm.
and so there was about a 10-minute gap between the start time. So we watched the beginning of X-Men 2, and the scene with Nightcrawler in
Yeah,
there was so phenomenal.
yeah.
And like all my friends are like, all right, let's go into Matrix. It's ready to start. And I was like, no, I want to stay and watch
You're
this.
like, no, I'm watching this one.
Nightcrawler looks so much better.
Yeah, yeah. That was a good one. I thought it was much better than X-Men the first one.
Yeah, it definitely was. And that's another series that's pretty rewatchable. And I'll even ride for the third one, even though most people don't like that. But
Yeah, it has its moments. I would say about the Spider-Man, the at least Spider-Man one. I remember, it's not popular at all, and probably never will be, like Nickelback. But I have a special place in my heart for that Chad Kroger song at the end because
yeah,
it
that
just,
song
Hero. That's
that
the song's
song is
called
great.
Hero. Yeah, it just drops in. It's so perfect for that movie.
Yeah, so speaking of great soundtracks, the soundtrack to Spider-Man 2 was somehow even better.
Hmm.
And my brother and I probably wore that CD out because we would listen to it so much. And Spider-Man 2, again, like that was at a time when sequels never lived, other than probably Terminator 2
Hmm.
and Godfather 2, sequels never lived up to the original. And Spider-Man 2 came and it was somehow better than Spider-Man 1.
Yeah, that was amazing.
And the only problem I have with Spider-Man 2 is they did the fake out ending. Like I haven't seen it in a while, so I don't remember the original ending off the top of my head where he defeats Doc Ock
Mhm.
and kind of goes on with his life. But then they have the runaway bride thing with Mary Jane at the
Oh,
very end,
okay.
and she shows up at his apartment, and I was like, that was kind of stupid.
Yeah,
Like that should just been the opening to the next movie.
I agree. It was a little bit like tacked on.
Yeah, and that's how it felt. So like coming out of the movie, I was like, well, that wasn't that good.
Mhm.
because all I could remember was that bad ending,
Hmm.
but I forgot about the first hour and 55 minutes or whatever.
Yeah, well, that's why you gotta
So,
end strong. Like I mean, Spider-Man One was really good, but that end scene is like one of the best Spider-Man scenes to this day. And like the Spider-Man Two had that weird scene where he's kind of web swinging out of the window, like after he talks to Mary Jane, like you said, and it's just
mhm.
quality of the animation for the web swing is just not as good. Like he's web swinging with a helicopter for a minute. It's kind of hokey.
Yeah, and it was like we want so they tacked on the Runaway Bride and then they're like, "Oh, we need to end on something cool." So they tacked on this CGI web swing out the window
Yeah,
that didn't work.
exactly.
But going back to Spider-Man 1 with the bridge scene, at that point in my life, I knew Gwen Stacy had died,
Hmm.
but I didn't know how. So I didn't know like this was a reflection that the scene on the bridge with Mary Jane and Green Goblin was a reflection of the night Gwen Stacy died.
Okay.
So like I had no expectation of Mary Jane to die there, but I couldn't imagine like being a comics fan and seeing that scene play out and wonder, and then like even how she snaps on the cable car,
Yeah, yeah.
like that would have been traumatic for me had I known what happened to Gwen Stacy at that point.
Right, right. Kind of raises the stakes a little bit.
Yeah, and it's great how they in current comic book movies everything is a very big nod and wink to the comics or to something else going on in the world,
Hmm.
and these were much smaller references back then.
Yeah, totally.
Like there were things like you'd have Wolverine saying, "As long as the suit's not yellow, I'm good,"
Right.
or like very little subtle things that like if you read the comics or watched the cartoons or anything like that, you knew where they were coming from.
Yeah, yeah. They're doing a good job of that with the Deadpool movies now because he's like nonstop, just like super obscure comic book references that are really great if you are familiar with the material. And it's always entertaining.
Yeah.
It's always kind of a little added bonus for us nerds.
On the one that stuck out to me, and we talked about this when we did our Deadpool 2 episode, was on the taxi that he gets dropped off at.
Mm.
It's got an Alpha Flight ad on top of it. I was like, nobody's gonna get that,
Oh man, I missed that one.
but
I
it's
didn't.
great.
That's good. I got to go back and watch it
Yeah,
again.
I think he gets dropped off at Xavier's mansion in a cab, and it's like one of the little TP ads on top of the taxi.
Oh, that's fantastic. Oh
You
well,
remember?
I was gonna say, you brought up the that scene on the bridge from Spider-Man One, but then
Mhm.
I actually thought, I don't hate on the Amazing Spider-Man series as much as most people. I didn't like the first one as much as I liked the second one, um, but I thought they did a good job with that exact scene, with Gwen Stacy. It's not on a bridge, but it really captures that moment pretty well, and they
Yeah,
didn't shy away from it.
no, they definitely didn't, and we'll get to that in a minute when we talk about Amazing Spider-Man.
Mhm.
Let's talk about Spider-Man
The
3.
first
What's your feeling?
we got to do it, don't we?
We
I
got to
was
do
trying
it.
to skip over it, but no.
No,
You
we got
know,
to do it.
Man, there were seeds in it of a good movie, but they were too few and far between and too small. The Sandman storyline was not bad, and the acting for that part of the story was pretty well. But then they decided, throw in three other villains that just didn't get developed at all, and it was muddled and a mess. And then you got Spider-Man in the black costume as emo Spider-Man dancing. I couldn't do it.
So I've got a super hot take. I really like Spider-Man
Oh
3.
yeah.
I saw it 3 times while it was in the theater.
Oh man. All right. What did you like about it?
I, it was fun.
Hmm.
Um, I liked that there were a lot of villains, but now I was 18, 19 when it came out, so not like a film buff of any sort at the time. Now I can see where the holes are and why people don't like it, but for nostalgic reasons, I still go back and I like it when I watch it.
Yeah.
Um, but I can see how all the villains are a muddled mess. But it was cool to see Venom on screen for the first time. It was cool to see They did a great job with
Hmm.
Sandman.
Hmm.
And like you said, the Sandman storyline on its own, really good.
Hmm.
The Venom story on its own probably could have been really
Yeah.
good. The Green Goblin number
Number
two
two. Uh-huh.
storyline on its own probably could have been very good, but to throw them all together and not give any of them time to really breathe, it doesn't work.
Yeah, it's just they had to do a trilogy. I guess they didn't know they were gonna have if they were gonna have a fourth movie, or they knew they weren't, and so they just decided to jam everything in, and it was just a bad decision.
Yeah, because I think during the planning stages when they thought there was going to be a fourth, I think he was supposed to get a hold of the black suit like at the end,
Ah, okay.
and then it was supposed to be Venom in the fourth
Hmm.
movie. Um, but yeah, The thing with the emo Peter Parker, and I read somewhere the other day of how to defend this, and I'm happy that I can do it
Okay.
here on my podcast. He's not cool, but Peter Parker, having never been cool, thinks that's what cool is. Thinks walking down the street dancing like that is cool because that's what you see in movies,
Oh.
and that's what a nerd would think is cool. So the black suit doesn't actually make him cool. It makes him think that whatever he's doing is cool.
Okay. I guess I would agree with that if not for the fact that everybody treats him like he's really cool while he's doing that. Maybe
No, they don't. They're all looking at him like he's
well,
crazy.
at first, right? And
In
then he does his dance scene, and like during that, everybody kind of gets
yeah,
into it. But no, I take your point. When he's walking down the street, he's like giving the little guns at people, and they're like, "Who is this?"
yeah. When he's in Mary Jane's restaurant with Gwen Stacy, eh, everybody's like going along with him. But then when he's doing it on the street, everybody's looking at him like he's crazy, which they should be.
Okay, you know what? That's the best explanation I've ever heard for why that is not a bad scene, and I'll take it.
All right, great. Glad I could help.
Thanks.
Glad I could help. All right, let's move on to Amazing Spider-Man.
Okay.
Wait, hold on. Out of the Raimi trilogy, who is your favorite villain in the Raimi trilogy?
Doc Ock. Spider-Man 2. That movie was just so good and he was such a good villain. I
Mm-hmm.
thought he worked the best. I didn't hate Green Goblin. In the first one, I thought he was
Green Goblin was
yeah,
really
Green
good.
Goblin was really good. What's the guy's name?
The CGI in the first one is very bad, like with the pumpkin bombs when
Yeah,
they evaporate people and like that. It's pretty bad. But Green Goblin was really Willem
Willem
Dafoe
Dafoe.
was probably the perfect person you could pick to be Green
He
Goblin,
was fantastic, and I mean
and Harry
I kind of
or Norman
I
Osborn.
kind of wish they hadn't done the mask just because it didn't let him shine through while he was being the Goblin. Like if they'd had a more anthropomorphic mask.
You need his eyes,
Yeah,
yeah.
his face. But Alfred Molina in as Doc Ock was also pretty fantastic.
They nailed the villains except for probably Eddie Brock.
Yeah.
And you could sell me on Eric Foreman as Eddie Brock if you gave him the room to grow and breathe in that role. But like giving him 5 minutes of screen time before he becomes Venom is not going to do
Yeah,
it.
it's a travesty. I mean, he's a foundational villain in like the Spider-Man mythos. You got to give him more time than that, and you also got to get a guy who's a little more beefcake. I mean, that's call me
Yeah.
like a traditionalist, but I feel like that's a big part of who Eddie Brock is.
Well, and Topher Grace, to his credit, is actually kind of tall.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's 6 feet tall, and I don't think Tobey Maguire is. So he has the potential to kind of tower over Tobey Maguire, but he doesn't because he's Eric Foreman,
Right.
and it doesn't hit.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I don't know mid 2000s who you're gonna cast Beefcakey in that role. That's a contemporary with Tobey. Like you could go Vin Diesel, but he's too old.
Yeah, it's too old. I don't know. I honestly haven't really thought about who I'd cast in that. That's a good theory question or query.
All right, we'll get back to you on
Okay.
that. All right, Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah.
This was the relaunch. We gotta see Uncle Ben die again,
Mm-hmm. Oh,
so something else that got pointed out to me at some point is Aunt May keeps getting younger and younger through all these iterations. Like
yeah.
there was like a meme that said like it started with I don't know the actress's name in the Raimi trilogy, and then it was Sally Field, and then it's Marissa Tomei, and next it's gonna be like Emma Stone.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what they're doing with that, but I guess they're just trying to make it more relatable, or maybe they just want the series to have more legs. Like with Marissa Tomei, she could theoretically do like 10 more of these movies before she's actually on May's age.
Well, right, and yeah, and she's a really great actress and can do a lot more than a lot of other people. I mean, Sally Field's really great too, but like you said, she's gonna age out much slower than any of the other actors if you get an older actress.
Yeah, and they might also just want to put more of like a load on that character. In the show, she's kind of just Peter's older aunt who occasionally gets in trouble or tries to marry Doctor Octopus or something like that. But maybe in the movies,
Yeah, that was a weird story arc.
maybe they'll like try to do a little more with her where she kind of gets into the action as well. I definitely could see them doing that.
Or if she's marrying Doc Ock, it's like she's actually in love with this guy and doesn't understand that he's Doc Ock
Right.
and not like he's trying to inherit this weird nuclear island that she somehow owns. Yeah, this is what was going on in the early 70s in Spider-Man comics.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff, and also that.
Yeah, but she was always really old and frail in the comics, and she's having her go younger and younger isn't really justice to her character. But I'm not one to like really be a stickler for Like, this character's supposed to be this way.
Yeah, I'm okay.
Like, I don't care if you make Johnny Storm black.
Yeah,
He
I,
Michael B. Jordan's great.
yeah, I'm okay with it. You know, there's some changes that I do mind, but some I don't. As long as you keep to the spirit of the character, I'm good with
If you made Aunt May a 20-year-old and dating Peter Parker,
it.
that's a bad
Yeah,
change.
that's a bad change. That's a
Just
fundamental.
making her 45 is fine.
I agree.
All right, so Amazing Spider-Man, we got Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone as Gwen Stacy. Did you like using Gwen Stacy over Mary Jane?
I was okay with it. You know, Gwen Stacy was introduced as a love interest before Mary Jane anyway, so that
Right.
stands up. And that part I didn't have any real problems with. Um,
Well, and they were supposed to. Mary Jane was supposed to be played by Shailene Woodley in the second part, and then in the third part as well. They shot like one scene with her, and I'm really glad that they cut that scene because I'm not a fan of Shailene Woodley,
okay, I actually can't
and
think
I
of
I
Shailene Woodley.
wouldn't have been able to buy it. She's the girl from the Divergent series
Oh
movies,
no,
like the main
yeah,
one.
no, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
not that those are good movies, but that's the easiest, most recognizable thing that
no,
she's
got
in.
it. Yeah, no, I mean, I was okay with them just using Emma Stone as a Gwen Stacy. That was fine with me. But you know, I didn't really love Andrew Garfield as Peter Parker. He was too cool. You know, he was too much of like a
Yeah.
kid, you know, and that's not, he's skateboarding around. He's kind of got like a quick, and you know, even in the comics in the early days, Peter Parker would occasionally like, you know, throw out like a quip to Flash when he was getting beat up, but he was still kind of also just this nerdy kid who really didn't have any friends. He wasn't very popular. And I don't think Andrew Garfield captured that in that series.
No, I will say, like where I am in the comics right now, he's in college and he's a little bit
Yeah,
cooler.
it gets cooler.
Like Gwen Stacy and Mary Jane are kind of chasing after him a little bit. Flash Thompson's his friend now, so he gets a little cooler, but not in the way that Andrew Garfield is cool in these movies. And I get what you're saying there. I just like Andrew Garfield as an actor, and I was happy to see him in these movies. And the relationship between him and Emma Stone, like that they built on set between Peter and Gwen, was perfect.
Okay.
Like you could really feel that.
Yeah, I thought they didn't do too bad a job of that. And I have nothing against Andrew Garfield. I do like him as an actor. I just didn't think that the energy he was given to that role, and that's maybe a more of a directional thing than an acting thing. But
Yeah.
I just didn't think it really fit what I view as like my version of Peter Parker, or what I like to see. But
Yeah, it's like what if we had Spider-Man, but he was cool and people
right, and
liked
he's
him.
got his like hair flopped over. He was doing a whole bit.
Mhm.
And he's also, I guess, the first of he started off the trend of the British Spider-Man, didn't he? Because we got
Yep.
Tom Holland after that, and so I guess Spider-Man won't be American for a while.
I guess not. That's
Yeah, I'm
okay.
okay with it as long as you do the
That-
accent, all right.
yep. Yep. Tom Holland's doing solid at it, so I'm not going to
He
argue
actually
with
does a much better job of the accent, I think, than Andrew Garfield. I just went back and was watching a little bit of Amazing Spider-Man, the first one, and he gives it a shot. He gives the Brook, you know, he gives his
it. He
Queens
slips a
accent
little. Yeah.
he gives it a shot, but he doesn't quite nail it.
Yeah, he slips in and out a little bit, but not quite as bad as Elizabeth Olsen as Scarlet Witch, slipping in and out of three different accents
Yeah,
in any movie she's shown up in the
that's just a
MCU.
mess. She started off being like what Slovakian, kind of a it's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she kind of just abandoned it halfway through. They were like, just stop doing whatever you're doing.
Yeah, and it changes every time. But yeah, so they bring in Gwen Stacy. The first movie, with the Lizard, I was really happy to see the Lizard as a villain in a movie. Like that was really cool, and I'm waiting to see Mysterio in the second in Far From Home. I guess like I've been waiting for Mysterio. So I hope they do that
Yeah, I
good.
hope so. I mean, they're
But
gonna
the
have to change
Lizard,
it quite a bit. I'm guessing. I mean, you can't do the classic Mysterio costume in a movie nowadays. I mean, that's just they couldn't even do Electro, and that was a more
no,
standard costume.
yeah, and they built a lot off of Electro's
Yeah, yep,
Ultimates look, so it worked a little bit, but yeah, if you got a big fishbowl on your head, like nobody's gonna take
right,
it
right. It's not the
seriously.
coolest thing in the world. Yeah, I thought the Lizard was good
Um,
too. You know, and I actually thought that my favorite part of Amazing Spider-Man 1 was actually the action. I thought they did a great job with the choreography and like the
mhm.
CGI. It really looked good. Like that last fight scene on the rooftop with the lightning storm. That's just like some iconic visuals there for Spider-Man.
Yeah, and Captain Stacy dying
Yeah,
up there,
yeah,
finding out that he's Peter and everything like that is great. The Lizard's face looked a little
yeah,
weird,
yeah. It did.
but like it was what they were going for. I think they wanted him to look more human. like more of a human lizard hybrid instead of just he turns into a giant lizard like in the
Yeah, yeah,
comics. So like I think they got what they were going for. It was just kind of weird, but like the way Reese fans played him and Dr. Connors both like they it did a great job, and the lizard was he was better than Venom in the first set of movies
yeah,
by
totally.
far.
And I guess the one good thing I will say about them making that choice as far as how to do the face was the fact that they actually, could model after Riz Ifans' face. Like, so, it actually looks like him, and he does like they put the he's
Right, you get the motion capture
exactly,
on it and
yeah,
everything, so you really get what his face looks like instead of like you're saying with the Green Goblin in the first one where he's got the big
right. Or if
helmet
he's
on.
just a huge lizard, I mean, you really can't do much with that.
Right. Um, so let's talk about Amazing Spider-Man 2, the saddest
Yeah.
Spider-Man film moment until Infinity War.
Right. Oh God. Yeah.
But so let's let's go with the elephant in the room. Gwen
hmm
Stacy's death. Do you think she had to die
I
in
I don't
these
think she had to
movies?
die. I mean, obviously they can do whatever they want. I think that it was a good thing that she died. I think that that was something that comic book fans wanted to see. I think it added a little bit of weight to the story, which wouldn't have been there otherwise. It kind of made it have there were stakes, and and then you have even that small. It's only 10 minutes of the movie after she dies, but you get to see
Hmm.
Peter Parker and Spider Man dealing with the weight of like that tragedy and what does he do with it. And I think that gave him a great opportunity to end the movie with a bang. I thought the ending of that movie was great.
Yeah, where he goes up against Rhino at the
Yeah.
last minute. I'm with the comic book fans that say Gwen Stacy had to
hmm
die. I think if you make her like in the Raimi trilogy, Gwen Stacy didn't have to die because she was barely a
Right.
side
Exactly.
character. But if you're gonna make her the main love interest of Peter, she has to die to give Peter that weight to keep doing, like exactly what you said, to move past it and keep doing what he
hmm
was doing. Um, because it gave him something to fight for. Because he lost something, he doesn't want anyone else to lose
Yeah.
anything now. So he has to go back out there and keep
Totally.
fighting. And that was a big thing in the comics of, him being depressed and not being able to go back out there and fight. And these movies did a great job of capturing that between all of the muddled mess of trying to set up this extended universe that never
Yeah.
kicked off.
And that you really identified it there because I think that pain, that struggle of like moving past these tragedies that keep happening. You got your Captain Stacy, Gwen Stacy, and like all the others over the years. I mean, that's a big part of who Spider-Man is, and it's one of those things that keeps reinforcing the great power, great responsibility thing. And without that
Hmm.
pain, which I thought was a little bit absent from the first Amazing Spider-Man, and even the majority of the second one, really kind of catalyzed exactly who Spider-Man has to become if he wants to remain a character that we all love.
Well, and even in the like going back to the Raimi trilogy, he didn't really feel any
hmm
pain. Like there was a little bit of pain. He couldn't be with Mary Jane, but really he could because she was alive and there. He was just choosing
Yeah,
not to. But there wasn't anything. There were no stakes behind like what happened to him. He didn't ever go up against anything that was too big for him. I guess would be the way to
yeah.
put it.
He had the Uncle Ben
Um,
tragedy, as every as
that's true.
but once they moved past it, I agree they didn't do too much with it.
He was as Spider-Man, he was very just happy-go-lucky and everything was easy, and like he had this inner turmoil in the second movie where he gave up being Spider-Man, but it was because he was late to Mary Jane's
Mhm.
play,
Right, right.
or he couldn't deliver pizzas on time or whatever. Like that's not why he loses. Like he questions himself
Mhm.
in the comics or in early TV shows, anything like that. It's because there's real stakes behind what's happening
Yeah,
around
yeah.
him.
I mean, those are like your issue to issue or episode to episode problems, but then there are like the big story arc problems that are like, why is it that I do what I do and is it worth it? And they explore that better, I
Hmm.
think, like you said, in Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Yeah. What do you think about the extended universe that they tried to set up? Were you excited for it? Did you think it was a
Well, I
mess?
mean, where they were talking about having the Sinister Six, um,
Yeah. And they
yeah, yeah,
teased the Vulture
yeah.
and
They
Doc Ock and
Right, they
Rhino
show
and
the room with
everything.
all their costumes. I am
Hmm.
not unhappy that it didn't happen. I would have been okay with it. I'll watch those movies, but I also just didn't know where they were going to go with it. Like I said, as much as I liked the ending of that movie, Amazing Spider-Man 2, I still didn't think it was my favorite. I think it's still like fourth on my list of all the best Spider-Man movies. Um, so I'm okay with them having moved on and doing what they're doing with the MCU version of Spider-Man.
Yeah, I'm I definitely would have been there on opening night for a
Yeah, of
Sinister
course.
Six movie. And if they would have done it right, it could have been
Yeah.
really good. But it's hard, and we'll talk about
Right,
Venom in
right.
a
Yeah,
little bit.
gotcha.
And it's going to be very. It would have been very hard to
Right, because
do
they were
that,
going
I
to do it
think.
without Spider-Man, right? I mean, that was the same way they're doing Venom.
He was gonna be, yeah, he was gonna be like in it, but not. He wasn't gonna be like their main antagonist. He was gonna like how Batman showed up in
Right.
Suicide Squad, kind of. I think is what
Well,
they were planning.
the problem with that, I think, is a problem that I see happening in a lot of different franchises. Is when you do things like that, you have to take these characters who are. I mean, the Sinister Six are just pretty straightforward villains. They're obviously complex because they've had years and years of history, but they're bad guys. And when you have a movie that's all bad guys, it's like, who do you pin your hopes on? Like, who's the character that you care about or that you want to succeed? And you can turn them into
Hmm.
anti-heroes, but I don't think that's who they are really.
No,
Yeah.
definitely not. So let's talk about MCU. Our favorite
Mhm.
Peter Parker. Um, what do you think of the Spider-Man in the MCU?
Well, I think that they've done an okay job. But the Spider-Man, I think, is less interesting than the Peter Parker. He's good as far as his like,
Hmm.
he's quick with a quip and a web. He's got the character part down. But I haven't been impressed with the visuals of Spider-Man as much as I'd like to be. I actually think they did, Spider-Man visually better in the Amazing Spider-Man movies. Um,
Yeah, the visuals behind Spider-Man and Amazing Spider-Man, two movies were
yeah,
very very good and
yeah.
on
But
point.
like in Homecoming, for instance, they have the big finale scene where he's on the airplane and he's fighting the Vulture and all this stuff. And there's a lot of iconic
Hmm.
Spider-Man scenes in that movie, which is why I like it so much. But the visuals, and I think this is a problem. They have the second unit problem with all the MCU movies, where you have kind of the second unit direction with all the action taking place at the same time as all the actors being on their stages. And so there's not as much of an interplay between like the directing of both of them. So it feels unintegrated. And so when the action kicks off in
Hmm.
Spider-Man Homecoming, it feels like not as emotionally attached to the story that we've been following up to that point. And I think it's been showing through a little more than I'd like.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. My take on him is he has this huge reliance on the tech from Tony Stark right now, and they took that away in Homecoming. But at the end of the day, he still
Yeah.
got it back, and he had it in Civil War, and he had it in Infinity War. Now I love the Iron Spider suit they gave him, and it had the legs and or the extra four legs, which was the
You like
coolest
the
part of
legs?
that
Oh
movie.
man, I hate the legs. I
Um,
can't stand him. I hated
I
him
like
in
the
the
legs.
comics. In Civil War when he made the wrong choice and
Yeah,
went with Tony Stark and like outed himself. I thought that storyline I was not a huge fan of. But my
very
yeah,
very bad
my
choice.
least favorite part of it though was that crazy costume with the legs. Man, I was not a fan.
I don't like the red and yellow one in the comics. I don't like the yellow on red, but I've always liked the extra legs. I just thought that's cool and gives him like this more spidery
Yeah, I
feel.
mean, I can see why like it would be something that would be like a cool added bonus to just like throw out there and maybe get some like a different style of action. But I'm just such a fan of like your foundational four limbed Spider-Man action
Hmm.
that I don't really need any extra legs. Yeah.
I gotcha. Yeah, but that was my only take is he's got all this reliance on
Mhm.
tech and it takes some of his charms away. He can't be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man if you have all of this stuff that puts you on the level
Right. If
with the big
he's just
guys.
kind of like a pared down Iron Man. I mean, I was glad they at least let him have his web shooters, like he did create those still. But then everything's just taken
Hmm.
and kind of upgraded by Tony Stark. I wasn't a huge fan of that part either.
Yeah, and yeah, my theory is that it might go away after Avengers 4 if Tony Stark doesn't make it back in one piece
Yeah,
from
which is probably
Avengers
likely.
4. Um, yeah, so he might end up losing it anyways, and that would be kind of cool to bring him back to his roots, have him create a new costume, and get like closer to the I'll call it real, but just the classic
Mhm.
red on blue
Well, they kind of did a
suit.
little bit of that in Homecoming, where he loses his suit because Stark takes it away from him after he messes up, and then he has to go back to his like sweatpants and goggles and stuff.
Right. Or at least
Yeah.
he'll have the original let's call it the Civil War suit, but he won't have the AI behind it because Tony Stark's not there to keep it up or anything like that. Maybe I don't know. I hope he kind of comes back down
Yeah,
to earth a little bit.
I'm with you there.
So the other thing I want to talk about is Miles Morales exists in the MCU somewhere. Do you think we get to see him?
I don't know. I know they're set. I mean, they got it's his Uncle Aaron, who Spider-Man's trying to pump for
Yeah,
information. Yeah, it's
Donald
Donald
Glover,
Glover.
who is also the Prowler, which
Right.
I hope
Yeah,
we
I
get
was
to
a
see
big
that
fan of
play
Prowler
out.
when I was when he first started.
Yeah, I love
But
Prowler.
I mean, maybe I'm sure eventually we will for sure. But I don't know when. It's one of those things I think they're going to keep a tight lid on for as long as they can. But like they just wanted to throw out that Easter egg early on to give people the hope. But on a long enough on a
Yeah, to keep
yeah,
people
and on a
hanging
long
on
enough
for it.
timeline, they're gonna have to. So I'm some at some point, but who knows when.
Yeah, I don't. I think I might rather see the Prowler first before
I'd
we
be
see
fine with that.
Miles Morales, and I think that's kind of what they're setting up with bringing in Donald Glover
Hmm.
as a character in this. He's a big enough actor that I think you have to
Yeah,
give him something
probably.
to do. You got any other thoughts on any Spider-Man before we move on to the Venom movie?
No, I mean we're gonna come back around to some comic stuff eventually. So I think on the movies, that's a pretty good
Yeah, we'll
cover
get
of the
back to
main points.
comics. Yeah. So the Venom movie. What do you think?
I gotta say I'm not in love with the trailer. Um, yeah, his
No.
long monologue with the, I guess they're supposed to go, they're going for funny and missing the mark by I feel like a wide stretch. I also get the feeling.
Is Eddie Brock
Well, I
funny?
mean, Venom is in the comics. Venom can be funny, but like not. Yeah. Oh, but
Venom
Eddie Brock
can be.
himself, no. But Eddie Brock is dark and brooding,
Yeah.
and he's kind of a downer. He's a
Kind of a
moron.
moron, isn't he? Yeah,
He's
isn't
a
he just like
self-pitying
a
jerk. Yeah, he's
a
kind of a
meathead?
jerk. He's always like, "Oh,
Yeah.
Spider-Man ruined my life," and yada yada. I'll be like the protector he couldn't. And they're doing this whole Lethal Protector storyline, which is a great comic because Mark Bagley draws it, and everything he draws is amazing. But as far as the storyline goes, I'm not sure how well it works if you're trying to make it into like this beginning of its own saga that's a separate thing from Spider-Man. And they also seem to be bringing in. I feel like they're going to be bringing in lots of symbiotes, and I am of the firm opinion that the more symbiotes you add beyond like just the Carnage, the worse. Like,
Well, yeah. So the villain is definitely a symbiote, and they it's a named
hmm
symbiote, and I'm sure you know, reading more Venom comics than I have, who
hmm
that's supposed to be. But I think Venom 2 is obviously like I'm sure there's a teaser at the end of Venom that shows the Carnage symbiote finding
for sure,
Cletus
yeah,
Cassidy. If there's not, they've done a disservice to
yeah, they
symbiotes in
really have. I
general.
mean, they've got to do that. If now, the one thing that I think would be at least leaving it open enough to like say that maybe eventually we'll see Spider-Man with Venom, at some point in the future. That might
Mm-hmm.
even give us a little hope. But just knowing it's only going to be Venom indefinitely, in this weird kind of dark anti-hero universe doesn't really appeal to me that much. I'll still watch it,
If
but
if you did a Venom 2 with Carnage as the main antagonist and just beating the hell out of Venom for, an hour and a half in the movie and then Spider-Man
mhm,
comes in and helps him finish him off,
that would be pretty
that would probably be
fantastic.
perfect.
I'd be on board for that.
That would be better than whatever's
Exactly,
happening in
I agree.
Venom 1. So do you think they should have used Flash Thompson Agent Venom instead of Eddie
No, no,
Brock?
I don't. Um,
Doesn't he give more of the anti-hero feel, and then he can kind of set up the Thunderbolts and things like that instead of just going deep,
That
deep,
would take
deep
us
on
on a different
symbiotes?
tangent, but I feel like if you're going to set up the Thunderbolts, you might as well start somewhere else. Like, you don't need Venom to get into that. I think that if you're going to do Venom, you should do. I agree with the tack they're taking with the Lethal Protector storyline, but I don't necessarily think it's going to be good.
Mm.
But I also,
I don't know anything about the Lethal Protector storyline,
it's
so
exactly what happened here. He like goes to the West Coast after making an agreement with Spider-Man to like not they have a begrudging kind of pact with each other. So he leaves the city and
hmm
starts protecting kind of a group of homeless people in California as like their lethal protector. um, so it's kind of what they're
gotcha.
doing with him as an anti-hero in his own city. Um, and I think it works because you can
Okay.
keep on the ground level. You don't have to add too many complicating factors. He's just out there doing his thing. With the Flash storyline, I think that would take too much explanation, and it also would be the wrong way to introduce the symbiote. Like to just go straight to that. I wouldn't like that. I don't think.
Do you think the origin of Venom here works without the clock tower?
The origin of Venom works. I you know I
With
gotta yeah
Spider-Man losing the suit?
I gotta wait and see what they do before I call that. I'm gonna guess that it's
Yeah.
not gonna be as good. I mean, the interplay between those two
I
characters is so critical to who Venom is that it really doesn't seem that I can't see how they're gonna make it make sense without that.
Yeah, I talked about this a little on a previous episode, just like in my final stinger segment, and I kind of said that like why not throw in this? You don't have to have Tom Holland, you don't even have to have Spider-Man, just have something at the top of the clock tower with
hmm
Eddie Brock at the bottom and
hmm
the symbiote falling on him. Like you don't have to explain that that's
Mm.
Spider-Man up there losing it. You just have to have it falling to him and him gaining it that way. And then he can kind of gain some
Kind of like
knowledge
a
from
tongue in
it,
cheek reference to
from
Spider-Man without
Spider-Man.
actually having him show up. Yeah, I can see that.
Right. That's kind of what my thought on it was. How you can
Yeah, it
have
could
your
work.
cake and eat it
Could,
too.
but we'll see what they do. We'll see if it works as it is. But I'm not optimistic. But I like to keep my hopes
Yeah.
low, and then I can be pleasantly surprised if things turn out to be good. So I'm still going to watch it, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about some animated versions of Spider-Man. You're, like I said, you're a bit older than me. So you didn't have the heyday of the 1994 series,
Right.
when you were a kid. I don't know if you watched it as like a
Yeah. I watched it. I watched it a
teenager.
bit, even though I didn't have like I wasn't. I was it wasn't on TV when I was like in high school, middle school. But well, high
Right.
school it was. But it was. I thought it was not bad, but for me, it had the same problem that a lot of other Spider-Man media had before, which was he's just such a like the physicality of Spider-Man is one of the coolest things about him. And when you don't have the animation ability or foresight to or the budget to like really make it look visually cool, it
Right.
loses something for me. And I just didn't think it looked cool enough. Yeah.
I'll take that. This was the 94 series was my first like real exposure to Spider-Man, and it was part of the reason I fell in love with the character. As a so 1994, I would have been 7, 8 years old. As a 7, 8 year old,
Oh yeah.
it was perfect for me because I you don't notice things like you're explaining when you're 7, 8 years old. You notice them when you're 15 years old trying to watch a kids show. So to me, it did capture Peter Parker in a perfect way. You know, he was kind of always down on his luck. Spider-Man, same thing. You didn't get the physicality from him because they couldn't animate it that way, but you could see um, how his powers worked and how he used them to fight different villains in different ways, and how he used his brain to fight different
Mhm.
villains in different ways. They covered a lot of great classic storylines. They went into the Clone Saga. They brought in Hydro Man, Red Skull. They
Oh, I
had
remember
all
they
the
had a Venom.
classic villains
I remember
too.
they had a
So I
Venom
just kind of
storyline that was
thought
pretty good.
they
Hmm.
I think they did a perfect rendition. So that's the good thing about animation is you can basically do shot for shot from the comics with
Hmm.
these classic storylines. Venom and Carnage, they got perfect, I think. And then even the relationship with Mary
Yeah.
Jane was really
Yeah,
good.
I don't mean to imply that it
Um,
was bad. Like I just was like not as into it as I could have been otherwise, so I didn't like go back to watch it as much as I might have otherwise. But I remember it being when I did watch it, like a good representation of Spider-Man.
yes. Yeah, it's that. It may not be animated best, but it's definitely there. Did you ever watch any like the 1967 version or Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends with
Yeah,
Iceman
I've seen like
and
I've seen little
can't
bits of them.
remember
I've
what
also
the other
seen
one.
what they had. They had a live action series from back then. That was oh
That's the
man,
only one
that's
I've
pretty
never
terrible.
seen. I have all the others on my
Yeah.
hard drive, and I watch them,
It,
occasionally.
back then they were trying to do a whole
Um,
thing. They had Captain America live action series. We had a clear shield. It was
mhm.
terrible. They had the Hulk, which the Hulk was good, but then they do crossovers with the Hulk was a good one. They
The
do
Hulk was the
crossovers
good
with
one,
him
yeah.
and Daredevil and like Spider Man, and they were really bad, but entertaining. I mean, they're worth watching.
Spider-Man would be very hard to do live
Yes,
action
yeah,
in
well,
the
he
70s.
was impossible, I would say.
And even the late 60s Spider-Man animated and the Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, like the animation was terrible. The webs
Mhm.
were never sticking to anything, and I just liked with Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, he had the camaraderie with
Mhm.
the other two characters. That was really cool to see, like him teaming up with people on a day to day
That's pretty
basis
cool.
was.
I've always liked seeing Spider-Man with like his friends. Like he's got a cool little fun friendship with Human Torch and all the other
Mhm.
funny guys in the Marvel universe, like Beast and Bobby Drake. Those have always been good companions for him. I think.
Yeah, and that's what and Spider-Man and Amazing Friends. It's
Yeah,
Iceman, Bobby Drake, and I don't remember what the girl's name
yeah. I don't
is.
remember. I didn't see that
This is
one.
gonna make me mad. I gotta look it up.
Was she like another superhero?
Yeah, she was Firestar.
Oh, Firestar. Yeah. Hmm.
Firestar was the other one. Yeah,
Okay. From the New Warriors, I guess. Well, she wasn't from the New Warriors, but
yeah, and I think her and Bobby Drake were like dating in it, and Peter Parker was just like their third wheel roommate.
okay.
But they did have a very good camaraderie between them all. And then Mary Jane would show up every once in a while to be Peter's date, so it wasn't so third wheely.
Okay.
The only other animated series I watched was the Unlimited, which they did kind of right after the '94 series, and he went to an alternate Earth. Um, and there was the symbiotes were going to the alternate Earth. He followed them. The only thing I really really like about this, because I just rewatched it like a couple months ago, is he had one of the best suits I've seen in that version of the show.
Really?
It was like a nanotech suit that came out of his web shooters and covered his body. Had the web cape. I always love the web cape whenever he has that.
Mhm.
It was kind of like a twist on the 2099 suit, but a little different.
Okay. Well, yeah, I actually I'm not familiar with that series. Maybe if I
It's not very good. It ran. It was only 11 episodes, and they weren't very good episodes.
okay. Well, I'm not sad I missed it.
Yeah. Do you have any experience with any of the other animated ones? They did some more like in the late '90s, early 2000s that I was kind of out on because that's when I hit high school. And it's like, oh, Spider-Man's for losers.
It's for kids, yeah.
That was a rough time in my life.
No, yeah, no, right. Without Spider-Man, what are you doing?
Yeah.
No, I actually really didn't watch too many of the other cartoons. Although I will say I'm looking forward to the Spider-Verse.
Yes, that's really why I wanted to lead into this with the other stuff that we had seen and go into the Spider-Verse because that looks
It
awesome.
looks so good, right? I mean, I'm actually kind of worried because it looks so good that I'm getting my hopes up, which is usually a bad thing.
Yeah, the only thing that worries me is if Miles Morales is really good in that, which he looks to
Mm.
be, is that's going to hold him out of the MCU longer
Right,
probably.
like I'll do.
They're not going to want to have that
Right,
crossover.
right. Like they'll do like more sequels of that and then keep him out of the MCU for longer. Yes, that's true. But I mean, if it's that good, if it's good enough, then I'd be willing to just watch him in the animated versions for a while. I'm okay with Tom Holland, just being the main Spider-Man in the MCU for a couple years.
Yeah, as long as we get Donald Glover as Prowler, I'm good with Miles Morales staying on the periphery and being in Into the Spider-Verse because the trailer for it looks awesome. The animation behind it looks awesome. I'm really excited for it. And I one of my favorite things is, and we'll talk about this next in the comics parts, is the clones and the alternate versions of
Mhm.
Spider-Man's and them all coming together and crossing
Yeah,
over. I love the interaction between Ben Riley and all these different versions of Peter Parker and Miles
mhm.
Morales and what's the guy from 2099?
Yeah,
Miguel.
Miggy. Yeah, what's his last name? Miguel.
I don't know.
No, well, I'm just gonna make something up.
I think it might be
I was
Rivera or
thinking
something
that,
like
but yeah,
that.
maybe.
It's it's a Hispanic name, but I don't know exactly
Right,
what it
right.
is.
Yeah, that's
But I always like when they cross over, so that's why I'm really excited about Into the Spider
yeah.
Verse.
I've always been a big fan of that too, and I was at reading comics and kind of right in the middle of discovering Spider-Man when the Clone Wars, not the Clone Wars, the Clone
The
Saga,
Clone
when the Clone
Saga.
Saga kicked off, and so it has a special place in my heart, despite the fact that I can acknowledge that a lot of it was very, very bad.
Miguel O'Hara.
Miguel O'Hara, yes, okay, yeah,
All right, so let's jump into the Clone Saga
okay,
and talk comics.
okay,
The Clone Saga, my experience with the Clone Saga is from the '94 animated series. I have not actually read the Clone Saga in the comics. I read parts of it in those times in the '90s when I was getting them from the grocery store, but it was never like I read this arc back to front. So I was just getting
yeah,
issues here and there of it.
okay.
I really like the Clone Saga, especially as how it was presented in the animated
Hmm.
series.
Hmm.
Tell me why it's bad.
Okay, well, from a comic standpoint, it was just really a muddled mess of a story. It had good intentions in the beginning, when they introduced Ben Riley, and they do it pretty well. He's got this cool costume, and he's kind of lurking around the backdrop, and you're not sure who he is.
I like Ben Riley costume
Yeah, it's a
too.
great costume. They used kind of drew off that for this costume that Spider-Man was using in Homecoming toward the end, right? With
Yep.
his sweatshirt. But yeah, I mean, so it started off with like good intentions, and it was also it had some good writing behind it too, and some amazing art. But the problem was they just dragged it on for way too long. It went on forever. I mean, and I guess you weren't reading comics at the time, but it was like every week there was like a new clone, and then the clone would discover that they were the real Peter Parker, or that then Peter Parker would discover he wasn't the real Peter Parker, and this just kept happening. And like the first couple times it was cool, and then it was like, wait a minute, who's the real Peter Parker? Like, where even is the main guy? And then you had issues where there were literally like clones of Spider-Man, like 30 clones of Spider-Man just in a big brawl by the end of the thing. And
Hmm.
there was a character called Spider Side who had like the worst costume I've ever seen. who was like this
I haven't seen that one.
malign costume. He had this crazy, weird costume that was terrible, and he was a disfigured, crazy clone of Spider-Man. It just really got too muddled, but good things came out of it, and there was some really good writing in it. So I'm actually not as huge like a decrier of that whole arc as most people, but I just don't. I gotta admit that
Oh, that is a bad
was
costume.
terrible, right? With the eyes,
Yeah.
it just went on for way too long, and it was really bad at times. So, but some
And so in the comics, it was Jackal that was behind all of the clones, right?
yes, and then he himself was cloned a bunch of times, and Gwen Stacy was cloned. Everybody was cloned, man.
And Mary Jane was cloned.
Everyone
Yeah.
was cloned like a lot, multiple times. It was so out of control.
So I guess what was good about it in the animated series is Hydro Man was the one behind it, and he had like a scientist friend that helped him, who I think was kind of supposed to be Jackal, but wasn't actually
Okay.
Jackal. Um, and so he created a clone of Mary Jane out of water, and he created a Peter Parker clone out of water because he's Hydro
Right.
Man, and
Right.
that's what he can do, I guess. And then so it was a little bit of that, and then they find out who's the real one and who's not, and then Ben Riley is the clone that gets created, like the first one that gets created, and they don't go into Kane and all the 30 other clones. It's just Ben Riley and Peter Parker, and then Madam Web comes in and sends Ben Riley out to a different universe to basically be the Peter Parker
Mm.
there, and then it kind of comes back around, and Madam Web brings 7 or 8 uh, different Spider-Man from alternate
Mhm.
dimensions. So it's more Spider-Verse than
Okay.
clones. It starts out as clones and turns into
Okay.
Spider-Verse. So she brings all of them together to fight Spider Carnage, which is Cletus Cassidy. Somehow, one of the clones, I guess one of the clones must have, I haven't watched the whole series in a while, but one of the clones must have gotten the symbiote at some point and became Spider Carnage, basically.
Okay. Of course.
Spider Carnage is pretty
That
cool.
sounds. I mean,
Yeah.
that sounds pretty cool. It sounds like it's hard to make Carnage more terrifying than Carnage, but yeah.
And I think it was the original Ben Riley clone became Spider Carnage, and all the other Spider-Man had to defeat him.
Okay.
It was now thinking about it and trying to explain it that way, it sounds a bit muddled as well. So I get why people don't like the Clone
Yeah,
Saga.
yeah, but there were some good things that came out of the Clone Saga. Like I was a big fan of the Kane as a character and his storyline.
Mm.
And they actually had a mini series that was called uh, it was Kane or it was Kane the Lost Years, I want to say, because Kane was like the clone of Peter Parker that had been shoved down a smokestack all those years before when they had the original clones like debacle,
Hmm.
and then he went off and kind of had his own little history, and it was drawn by John Romita Jr. and it kind of outlined this really dark, sad story of him being on the road as like this kind of weird bearded Peter Parker biker character. um,
Oh yeah,
Seeing
yeah.
what made him
Though I
into
think those were the ones that I read. I think I remember Kane
yeah.
from that time
Yeah,
period.
yeah, it wasn't bad. It had some good stuff in there. And to be honest, like the end of the I was actually we were going to talk about my favorite storylines, and some of them actually
Hmm.
overlap with the Clone Saga. Like I wouldn't say they are the Clone Saga because that thing went on forever, but there were small storylines that like were inside of it, especially in the Amazing Spider-Man book, and those were written by J.M. DeMatteis, who's like just does the best Spider-Man that there is. He's fantastic, and there's some storylines.
I'll get to him in like
Yeah,
20
right.
years.
It'll take you forever, but when you get there, that's a golden age, man. That's Mark Bagley and him just really like hit firing on all cylinders. And there's some really good stuff that came out of that. Um, yeah,
Football season is usually when I get a lot of my comics reading. I'll go through. So on the Marvel app, they have the Masterworks collections that you can
yeah,
buy. So it's just like they put them in soft covers in like Barnes and Noble and stuff that you can find them. But there it's just like 10 years. It's not 10 years. It's the 12 issues in a
uh-huh.
year all bounded together. So I'll go through like 4 of those during football season, so I can get through 4 years pretty quickly while I'm just watching football in the background. So I'm hoping to get more in now.
Nice. Yeah, you got to get caught up. You got the best is still ahead of you. I think. I think.
I know I'm really waiting to get to the 90s and cross over with some of these that I know I've already
Right.
read.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk about more of your favorite comics arcs. I'm going to tell you mine, and we can talk to them about them when we get
Mhm.
there. The only other two that I wanted to hit on was Civil War, and then Civil War leading into the One More Day storyline.
Oh, okay. Leading into or the One More Day storyline itself.
Both.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
So we can kind of do that as one thing, but I'm sure you have more because you have more of a comics background than I do. Because right now where I am, there haven't been these long arcs other than Aunt May marrying Doctor Octopus.
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's it's true. They didn't. I don't think they started doing these really long arcs. They had character things that went on for a long time and dragged for years, like the whole Ned Leeds saga. What happened to Ned Leeds? But
Mm-hmm.
as far as like a
Yep.
coherent story that just lasted for a long time, and then these special events that they started doing however many years ago now, like Civil War, I guess was one of the earlier ones. That was not always how they did it, but I guess I've always been fascinated with the darker side of Spider-Man. I mean, I always like to see him pushed, to his limits because as a character, he's moral and he's good, but like we talked about before, he's not perfect and he has problems. And so when he gets pushed, to the edge, especially protecting the people he loves, it makes for like really good story arc, especially when you have good writing. So I think my number one favorite storyline is the Child Within, um, and that was the second Green Goblin. So that was Harry Osborn and Peter Parker
Yep.
finally having it out, and that was also yeah.
I just got to where Harry Osborn took over for like they've had their first
Okay.
battle. Um, but I think there's probably obviously going to be more to come
Yeah,
on
yeah,
that.
definitely. So, I mean, it was mostly that saga, at least the Child Within, took place in Spectacular Spider-Man, and it was J.M. DeMatteis and
Okay.
Sal Buscema who was like at the height of his artistic ability, I think, and he was just killing it. And they have this whole series where they have to kind of reconcile with each other. Harry's going crazy because he's taking the Green Goblin formula and it's driving him mad, kind of
Mm-hmm.
threatening Peter Parker and threatening his family. And like Parker doesn't know what he's going to do, but he's still trying to play on the fact that like they used to be friends. And there's some really touching scenes with like Harry and MJ and with Peter and Harry where they try to like, hash it out, but then Harry's just too far gone. It really is just like some high drama of the best kind with Spider-Man. I mean, it really is probably the best of Spider-Man.
That's that's really good, and I'm excited. Where I am in the books right now, Spectacular Spider-Man doesn't even
Oh, okay.
exist,
Yeah.
so I
Yeah,
got a
I got
ways
some
to
time.
go. Um, but that relationship with Harry was always one of the best things about that too. Is they're roommates, but his father's his mortal enemy, and then eventually he becomes his mortal enemy, and they know about each other, and Norman knows about him and is constantly trying to
Yeah.
kill Peter without hurting Harry, and Harry's wondering why like Norman's being so weird because it's really because he's trying to kill
Yeah.
Peter
And he's
some way,
insane.
and like yeah, those are always the greatest parts when Harry and Peter kind of got to play off each other, and Peter had to deal with how he felt about Harry, because he is his best friend, but at the same time, like now he's got to put him
Yeah,
in his
yeah,
place.
and it always comes, and that saga, the childhood is where it really all comes to a head, and finally, like I think, is one of the better, just like complete arcs of a story I've ever seen.
Harry always got a bad rap too, as I'm seeing he's the like the token societal problems character. Like whatever
Mhm.
was wrong with society at the time they're writing the books, we're gonna put that on Harry. He was addicted to drugs at
Yeah,
one point, and he's got mental health problems, and like so like he's just the problem child of anything that's going wrong. I'm sure he's going to be a victim of like inner city violence in the mid '80s
yeah,
when
he's
I
like
get
the
there.
whipping boy for all the social issues.
He's going to get like once we get to the mid 2000s, he's going to be the kid getting bullied in high school, and that they're going to catfish him on Facebook or whatever. Like
That's
that's
the
just
thing that
going to be
pushes him over
Harry.
the edge, finally, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
You said you were a girl, but
what?
you weren't.
I must don my father's mask. Yeah, I can see it. Um, that so well as far as another storyline that I think is great. If we move on from that one, is Craven's Last Hunt.
Yep.
So I'm not sure if you're there. You're
I'm
probably not
excited to
there
get to
yet.
that one. I'm no, I'm aware of it
Yeah,
though.
well, that's also J.M. DeMatteis. So again, that guy. Every time I look at a Spider-Man story and I don't remember who wrote it, but I remember loving it, it's always him. um, yeah, it's
That's
a good
good.
indicator. But Craven's Last Hunt is,
Yep.
premise being Craven kind of takes Spider-Man, buries him, takes over his place for like a little while, runs rampant, and you know hijinks ensue. But it's really like kind of a dark, moody, melodramatic story, but it actually works. And the whole thing is kind of set to
Mm-hmm.
like they do like this rendition of William Blake's poem Tiger, but they say spider instead. And you'd think that would be
Oh
bad,
yeah.
but it actually works. Um,
I like Craven as a villain. I always thought it was weird that he was Chameleon's
yeah,
brother,
yeah,
but other than that, I like him as a villain and like just being this the most dangerous game hunter kind of guy. And like I'm just being obsessed with Spider-Man in that way. He reminds me more of a Batman villain than like some other villains that you see out there, because a lot of Batman villains, their obsession becomes Batman, and they're all these obsessive.
He's
The
Bane.
Riddler
Bane,
and the
Bane and
Joker
Craven.
and Bane, they all just have this obsession that turns into Batman eventually, and that's what happened with Craven. Is he wanted to hunt the biggest, meanest thing, and he did it, and he was always successful. And then Spider-Man
Yeah,
came in his
exactly.
path.
And then he realized that Spider-Man was the thing he wanted to hunt, and so it's kind of a
Yeah,
cool interplay when he's done right.
and now going on 60
Yeah,
years, he's
yeah.
still hunting.
Not the most successful hunt, but but that's kind of the problem with these continuous
He's,
comics, right? Like as you go, it's like, all right, you got to keep chopping it up into smaller stories.
well, and you can tell like in the in the late 60s and early 70s, you could tell like they didn't know it would go for 60 years, obviously. So they're like, okay, this year Harry's in high school. Oh, he graduated high school. Now he's in college. And it's like, now he's in his third year of college. Oh, shit, we've got to do
Right.
something with him now because he can't graduate because we still have all these college problems and this book's going
Yeah,
to go
yeah.
on forever.
It's interesting to see them try to like do
So
that.
it's like, how do we keep him still? We've been moving with the continuity, and now we've got to
Yeah.
keep him still. So let's reset the
I actually have
continuity.
liked a few. There's been a few like Eric Larson's Savage Dragon, and then Invincible by Robert Kirkman. Like those books did an interesting thing where they said let's just move in real chronological time, like throughout our books. So like those books actually take place in real time. So the
Mm-hmm.
guy graduates high school, and 4 years later he graduates college, and then it keeps going. It's kind of fun, but you can't do that in the Marvel universe.
Yeah, Spider-Man started like that,
Quick,
and then it went off the rails very
yeah,
quickly. And now it's like a whole year's worth of books happen in 2 days because they're like, he can't graduate college yet. We're not ready for
Now we
that.
got to de-age him.
He just went on a date with Mary Jane last
Yeah,
week.
right.
He can't
12 issues,
graduate.
not that much.
How do you feel about like so I don't, because I didn't read it yet, I don't know how it actually went down, but what is it, Superior Spider-Man, where Doc Ock takes over the mantle
Yeah,
of Spider-Man? Was that a brain swap thing? How did
yeah.
that work? And how do you feel about it when they kind of role reverse it like that?
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting thing to do for a while, but just like anytime they try to get rid of a character because they've like reached peak that character, like with Wolverine being dead for many years, I think he's back now finally. But or Jean Grey, is dead
Mm,
for a very long time. Sometimes they feel need to get rid of a character to change things up, and so the way that played out was he had some sort of somehow Doc Ock was like trying to take over his personality or like his body, and so he ended up
mm,
like having to fight within himself for control of his own body, and like had this heroic story arc where at the end he's kind of subsumed by the Doctor Octopus brain pattern, and that's kind of all I can remember about how exactly it went down. It was comic book stuff, so I'm sure there's a lot of
right.
nonsense involved, but it was okay. The Superior Spider-Man as a character was kind of fun. He had a cool costume, and he was kind of a jerk, and it was a nice gimmick, but it went on for too long. By like after they
Yeah.
did it, I was like, oh, that was kind of interesting. But I actually just want Spider-Man back. I'd like Peter Parker back now, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I remember thinking that like it went on for a couple of years, I want to say, and it was like I saw it when it happened. I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's a cool twist. Like that'll be a good little,
Hmm.
few month run or whatever. And then like it's like 2 years later, and I'm like, Doc Ock still has the Spider-Man
Yeah, it's
costume.
like you're
Like, what's
still
going on there? Now I
yeah,
can't
it's
go
like you're
into
still
for
doing
that one.
this, and then so the tail end of that, which they turned out, so he gets obviously comes back and gets his body back and stuff, and then he's left with like Parker Industries. I thought that was not the greatest choice on the part of the writers because it puts Spider-Man
Now you can't make
right.
Peter
You just
Parker
can't. It's
rich
not who
and
he is. I mean,
powerful.
it's not how he works. So anyway, that was not my favorite storyline.
He'll get caught in some like money
Oh,
laundering
it already
scheme
happened.
or something like that, and
He's been
it'll all come back. Oh, okay, good.
yeah.
Okay, good. So do we want to talk about Civil War?
Yeah, let's do it. You were you,
All right.
that's your favorite, huh?
Civil War is one of the ones. Yeah, that's one of the ones I've gone. And like I said, I haven't gotten to the point where they're broken out in these big story arcs, but that's one of the ones that I went out of chronology just to read specifically because I thought it was interesting as a take. So I read the 6 issue Civil War, like the straightforward, this is what everyone's doing, and then I read the Spider-Man specific spin-off that they
Yeah.
did. And I I was mad when they first announced the movie and they didn't own Spider-Man yet because I was like, how do you do this without Spider-Man?
Right.
Because
Right.
Spider-Man's the turning point of it. Him taking off his mask is what turned it into a war,
Yep.
basically. That and Thor dying, I
Yep.
guess. or
Fake,
fake
fake
Thor.
Thor, Thor clone.
Yeah. Um, I I agree with you that that was a bad decision, but I, as a however old he was at that point, as a teenager, early 20s, like that's the choice you have to make because you're going with the guy who's had your back because he's Tony Stark's prodigy at that
In the
point,
movies, no, in the
protege.
movies, I agree. I think it makes total sense in the movies because I,
Well, even in the comics, he was Tony Stark's
well, in
protege.
the comics, this is a normal Spider-Man who's been around for years. He's married to Mary Jane. He's 30.
Oh, he is.
He's in
Okay,
his
I
30s.
thought he was
No,
younger.
no, he's in his 30s.
Sorry.
This is like the most mature Peter Parker that we have. In fact, that's why
I guess that's
when
right.
they
Thinking about One More Day now, I remember
right,
that. Yeah, he's
because then
gone
they
through all
walked it
that.
back with one more day to unmarry him and erase everybody's memories and stuff. Um, but yeah,
Right.
he was so that's one of the reasons why I didn't like it because what it did was to kind of take agency from Peter Parker and like all these years he's been building up as a character and maturing and like just cementing himself through all these storylines that we just talked about that are really good. And then they kind of made him be like this lapdog to Tony Stark for no reason. Like it just didn't seem in character.
Hmm.
He's like oh I'm gonna choose this side, which was kind of clearly wrong. Just because I think it's the right thing to do because Tony Stark told me to. It made him seem kind of like a milksop. Like uh, he didn't really make that decision for himself. He let himself be talked into it, and I don't think that's who he was at the time when they did it.
No, and if when you read the Spider-Man spinoff, you can kind of see that like he's kind of going through that turmoil of making that
Mm-hmm.
decision, and then he does decide to go with Tony Stark. I like Civil War, like the 6 issue special. I like that
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
generally, just as a story pitting Iron Man against Captain America and pitting everyone against each other and why they're doing it. And Captain America's clearly on the right
Mm-hmm.
side, but as Spider-Man going into it, you can see that like he's having trouble making this decision, and he gets easily persuaded by Tony Stark. Like he said, it's just, oh, Tony said to do it, so I'll be
Right. Right.
okay. My family will be okay. There's what is it, 2006? So 40 years of, and it's not 40 years in his life, but 40 years of comic books telling us that if people find out who he is, people get
Right.
hurt.
Right.
And now all of a sudden he's going, no,
Yeah.
they'll be
Yeah.
fine.
And
They'll
then
be
it's funny
fine.
because then they immediately get hurt.
And then they immediately
Immediately.
kill
Right.
Aunt May.
Oh God. Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk about One More Day. So Aunt
Uh
May
huh.
gets
Uh huh.
killed by a
Yeah. Yeah.
sniper,
Kingpin
and
hired the sniper, right?
so then I think so. Yeah, I've only read it once, and it was probably 5 years ago. But yeah, she gets killed by the sniper. Him and Mary Jane are there. What do we do? Mary Jane's kind of telling him it'll be fine. Like she was old anyways. Get
Mhm.
over it. Um, but this is what I don't get about Spider-Man One More Day. Like, how long did you think you were really gonna hold on to Aunt May?
Yeah.
Like, regardless of how she died, eventually she was gonna go. And I get it. Maybe uh, he doesn't get the time to have closure with her or anything
Mhm.
like that. And I believe he told her that he was Spider-Man before that, before he announced it to the world. But then he like had to lie to her, or like he turned it back around, and she didn't think he was Spider-Man all of a sudden. And so then he goes to Mephisto and gets it all reset, and it's like, all right, now you're not thinking rationally. Like, was that really the best decision? You're not married to Mary Jane anymore. You never get to experience that again. But nobody knows you're
Yeah. Yeah.
Spider-Man.
Well, I mean, from a character standpoint, it doesn't make much sense. I mean, your description of it is perfectly accurate, and I think that was why I didn't like it that much because it just wasn't very well written or conceived of. It just didn't kind of gel as a story, and the characterizations were all off. In fact, if you look a couple years earlier, well, more than a couple, but Amazing Spider-Man issue 400, which I had back in the day, had like this gray tombstone shaped cover. That was also a Death of
Mm.
Aunt May issue. Um, Now it was walked back through other reasons because it happened during the Clone Saga, so of course it did. But as a standalone issue, it was like one of the best issues of Spider-Man of all time. I mean, he like has this kind of final moment with her where she reveals that she always knew that she'd known for years that he was Spider-Man. Like,
Oh, I think I've read that. I've either read it or like read
yeah, and
synopsis
he's
on
like
it.
by her
Yeah.
bedside when she like kind of goes, and dies, and you know, it, doing it that way, you could allow for. I feel like doing it that way, the character at least it makes sense for the character to like let Aunt May go. But
Yeah, this he just flies off the handle and goes and makes a terrible decision, making a literal deal
mhm,
with the devil, and like doesn't stop and think about it at any moment, which is, like you said, completely out of character
mhm,
for Spider-Man. He's always think first, I can find a
yeah,
way out of this. let's
Yeah.
figure it out. Like there's better ways to protect Mary Jane than
Never
never
seen it
seeing
again.
her
Yeah.
again.
The one thing I will say that was a good thing about that storyline was that after they did that reboot, it actually got pretty good. They got Marcos Martin drawing Spider-Man, and I forget who was writing it, Dan Slott. And those were some really good storylines because they walked it all the way back to like the early days where Harry Osborn's his friend again, and they're all hanging out.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's good.
but the story itself was like
Right before Harry started getting
right, of
online
course.
bullied. Yeah, so those I won't say they're like my favorite Spider-Man stories because, like you said, they have their holes and they don't necessarily reflect Spider-Man in a great light. But they're two that I've read outside of the chronology that I had thoughts on that I wanted
Yeah,
to
yeah.
talk
Well,
about.
they're not bad, and then the art for all of those is really good. Especially like for that standalone series where he gets the black costume and stuff. I forget the guy's
Hmm.
name who draws it, but I like that guy a lot.
Yeah, the symbiote saga when they keep it just to like Spider-Man gets the black suit. Okay, now
Yeah,
there's Venom. Now there's Carnage. Like if you keep it wrapped in that little circle, it's fine. When you get into all the other like 500 other symbiotes that
yeah.
come along, and I'm sorry for everybody out there that I've pronounced symbiote probably 15 different times throughout this. I have not said symbiote or whatever they said in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
first trailer of the Venom movie. So I
Yeah,
feel like
you're
I'm
fine.
okay.
You're fine. I don't think the legions will descend on you for this.
No. So yeah, I think if you keep it wrapped up with those three, it's good, and I like those storylines. But when you get into all the other crazy symbiotes coming in, it gets a little off the
Yeah,
rails fast.
totally.
All right, we got a couple more things before we wrap up. Do you want to do villains or suits first?
Well, if we can, I got maybe 10 more minutes, so we can do.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
we
we
can
can
do
go both
both
that
that
quick. I can
quickly.
do. Let's do. You had villains first. We can just do that. Mhm.
Okay, top three
Top three
villains.
villains. Second Green Goblin is Harry, mostly because of that Child Within storyline. Um, Lizard,
Okay.
because he's just so crazy. It's a huge lizard, right? What do you do with that? I think it's like a good non-cerebral challenge for Spider-Man. He's got to like,
Yeah, I'll give you that. And like Doc Connors is his friend or like his mentor in some situations, so he knows it's Doc Connors all the time, and he can't go after him like
right,
he
right. But that thing is
needs
trying
to.
to kill him. So the Torment storyline is a great storyline with the Todd McFarlane drawing. That was a Spider-Man 1 with the iconic
Hmm.
cover where the lizard is just going after him. Um, yeah,
That
it's good
one I
stuff.
have read.
And then third, I would say is Doc Ock, mainly just because he's his first villain. He's got a special place in any Spider fan's heart.
All right, I'll give you that. So mine are Green Goblin, either instance really. I just like we were talking about before with the the needing to be Harry's friend and trying to protect Norman or Harry, whoever's
Hmm.
in the costume. Just going in and not basically not going full steam at them because he has this inner turmoil between, well, this is my friend's dad or this
Hmm.
is my best friend. I can't go. So there's always this great back and forth between Green
Yeah,
Goblin
totally.
and Spider Man. Carnage,
Ooh,
because he just it just I like the release of insanity. I like the Joker.
yeah.
I like Carnage. Just like give me full on insane as a
Hmm.
villain and not explain him.
Hmm.
I love Michael Myers from the original Halloween movies, not the Rob Zombie ones where they
Yeah,
give him a backstory.
right.
Um,
Agreed.
but just like this insane for no reason other than insane. Like Cletus Cassidy just wants to kill people the best and most efficient way he can.
Yeah, I think that's actually similar, like with what I was saying about the lizard, which is just like he's just this thing you can't reason with, and I like that.
Hmm. And then my last one is Mysterio. Just because like all the things that he does with special effects and like in the cartoons and the early video games that I would play, Mysterio was always like the coolest villain because they could animate him in these ways where he did all this crazy stuff that you would never see coming.
Yeah, yeah,
Where I am in the comic books right now, I haven't really like he's shown up in maybe three or four, and they haven't really gotten into like all the crazy stuff he can do with his special effects and stunt training and all this other stuff that he gets into.
right.
So I'm excited to read more on him because he's always one of my favorites, just with the different illusions he can do.
Yeah, he's one of those characters too that they do a lot with. Like sometimes he's really a serious villain, and sometimes they like treat him like a joke, and he kind of it depends on who's
Yeah,
writing
and
it.
that's yeah, and it's cool that they can do that because he can be really campy or he could be
Hmm.
serious and very
Yeah,
deadly.
totally.
All right, so top three Spidey suits.
This is a tough one. I mean, the villains one is a tough one too, of course, and
Yeah,
I'm almost rethinking. I want to put Carnage in my top
I
three.
had to as we were going as we were going through everything else, I had to change a few of my favorite
Oh, did you?
suits.
Yeah. Because you keep forgetting about certain suits. Like you're like, oh right, there was that
Yeah,
one suit. There's been a million. Um, I think the first would be I like the black suit, and the black suit's fantastic. That might be my favorite suit.
that was my number 4 alternate.
Oh, okay, four. All right. I mean, for
Yeah,
me, it just is like it's so simple. It's I have a thing about simplicity, like visually at least. Um,
it's simple, and then black is always
it is,
great.
it is like the Daredevil suit in the first season of Daredevil, where it's just like sweatpants and his little mask.
Hmm.
So everybody likes that. Second would be classic '90s spider suit, which is the one everybody's familiar with. It's got the 8 legs on the spider itself, going in the different directions,
Yeah,
and no underarm webs. Um,
I like the
I
underarm
like them
webs
too, but
and the
I like them
capes.
too, but they're not in my top three.
All right, I'll give you that.
And then I think that the third would probably be Spider-Man 2099, the original. Like, so this is obviously not Peter Parker, but Miguel O'Hara.
The Miguel
Yeah,
O'Hara, yeah, the
the
blue
blue
and
and red,
red.
man, that thing is that's just a super well designed suit. And I have these
Yeah,
alternate to that, which I'm not 100% sold on this yet. I love Ben Riley's suit, so that's up there. But that PS, I haven't. We talked about the PS4 thing over email, and like I haven't played it at all. But that
yeah,
suit is really good looking.
yeah. I like that with the white spider instead of the black or blue one.
Yeah,
Um,
they don't usually make changes like that look good, but that one does.
yeah, all the other video game suits kind of take a step back, except this one. It looks really cool. I haven't gotten that far
Hmm.
in the game where I'm playing with it yet, but I'm
Okay.
I'm cool. So yeah, my number 3 was 2099. With the blue and red because that one is
Yep.
cool. It's got the web cape and everything. And then my number 2 is the big time. That's the black with the kind of neon green and the neon green eyes.
Oh wow. Wait, what's that from?
I don't know. The first I
Okay.
saw it was in the Amazing Spider-Man 2 video game a couple years ago, but it is
Oh,
somewhere.
this one. Yeah. That came from Kane got that suit after.
Okay.
I remember that
And in
storyline.
some
That's
instances,
a good one.
it's neon yellow or neon orange, so it's got the black
Red,
and then it's
red too
got the
sometimes.
neon accents. So kind of
Hmm.
reminds me of the the Joel Schumacher Batman movies. Got to get a lot,
Yeah, I like that.
got to get a lot of neon in the late '90s.
True.
And then number 1, we talked about this already, is the Ben Riley, kind of the hoodie over the red jumpsuit was
Hmm.
always one of my favorite. They had the web shooters on the outside, like the wrist shooters. I
Yeah, he even had the pouches. He had the pouches around the waist too, and like around the knee, I think too, right?
Yep. I don't know why I always liked any of the suits with the web shooters on the outside. I always liked those better.
Yeah, those are pretty. It's cool. I like when they do that.
It's a good
That is a good
twist.
suit.
Yeah.
It is.
All right, so that's all we got for Spider-Man. I think we covered him.
We covered some good ground there. Yeah, I mean it was an ambitious undertaking to begin with. I think we did pretty good service.
Yeah, we didn't even get into video games because you said you're out on video games, so we'll have to do that a different time with someone else.
Yeah, definitely. I'll definitely listen in for that one.
It'll come sometime. Well, thank you for talking about Spider-Man with me. I don't have any friends that like to talk about Spider-Man, so I'm glad I got to sit here for a little over an hour and talk about it.
Hey, anytime. And if you ever want to talk about Spider-Man again, I can always come back and do this for many more hours.
As I
No
go
problem.
through the comic books, I'm sure I will have many more topics to discuss. That's what I've noticed about I've been going back through Harry Potter recently, and
Mhm.
like I'm just finding all these different things that I want to talk about, more specific like things rather than just like let's talk about everything Harry Potter. Let's talk about this one specific thing that we
Right.
could go on for an hour for. So as I
Yeah.
read more comic books, I'll probably have more topics that we can go deep on
Sounds fun.
because
Well, thanks for having
Spider-Man
me
is
on. I really
interesting.
appreciate it. Yeah, it's super interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for talking to me. And you want to plug your podcast one more time?
Sure. Yeah, we're the FYMP podcast. You can find us on like iTunes, Stitcher, all the regular places, and we're at FIMPcast on Twitter, and we tweet about random comic stuff. So check us out.
They're a good follow on Twitter. Hey, this is an ad about something. Audible, to be exact. Audible is a great way to catch up on all your favorite stories while on the go. Audible includes an unmatched selection of audiobooks, original audio shows, news, comedy, and more from the leading audiobook publishers. I've been using Audible for years on my daily commute to catch up on some of my favorite fantasy stories, including Harry Potter, The Once and Future King, and A Song of Ice and Fire, narrated by the Guinness World Record holder Roy Dotrice. I also love getting Audible's recommendations. Just recently, Audible recommended that I read Armada and Ready Player One by Ernest Cline and Spectacularly narrated by Will Wheaton. I listened to both of these stories and loved them both because the narration by Will Wheaton just made the stories even more enjoyable and immersive than if I would have read them on my own. So if you love books, I've got some great news for you. Right now, for my listeners, you can get any audiobook you want from Audible for free when you sign up for your free trial of Audible using audibletrial.com/a-podcast-about-something. Again, to download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/a-podcast-about-something. Thanks for listening.
And now it's time for the 2-minute ISO.
But first, listen to this promo from one of my fellow podcasters.
Every day, we're surrounded by media. Books, movies, art, music, games, apps, podcasts, etc., etc. With this constant bombardment, it's easy to miss great media gems in the chaos. But fret not, you've come to the right place, my friend. I'm Jason, and I love media. I invite you to check out the Mixed Media Forest podcast, the podcast where I trudge through the forests of media to find hidden gems for you, the listener. Every episode of Mixed Media Forest is chock full of fun, reviews, nostalgia, positivity, news, rants, stories, and recommendations about all things media. Again, that's the Mixed Media Forest podcast, created on Anchor Podcasting app and available everywhere fine podcasts can be found. Give it a listen. It's what all the cool kids are doing.
What better way to end this Spider-Man-centric podcast about Spider-Man than to talk about the new Spider-Man, the Marvel Spider-Man for PS4 video game. We didn't talk much about Spider-Man in the actual episode. I guess didn't play a lot of Spider-Man video games, so we didn't get a chance to talk about it there, but there was plenty of other Spider-Man content to cover, and there will be in the future, I'm sure. But I want to talk about the new game and how it reflects on some of the old games. The new game for PS4, I love it. It's amazing. I've been playing it. I haven't progressed too far in the story yet because I've been going around town and unlocking all the towers and collecting the backpacks. I like the backpacks. They got cool little Easter eggs inside each one. A big thing, like before I had got into playing the game, I saw on Reddit a lot was the photo mode. And honestly, it's fine. I could do without it. To me, it doesn't really add anything unless maybe sometime later in the game there's a purpose for it story-wise, but honestly, like it's kind of cool to take these pictures, but it's not necessary. Like it's just there and it's fun. I don't find myself stopping a lot to do photo mode, but I find myself like just wanting to finish collecting all the backpacks. I've got like 40 of them so far out of 55, and I want to just finish that more than anything because that's the coolest thing to me is find those Easter eggs. I've seen some cool costumes so far. I haven't been able to unlock any of them because I haven't progressed very far through the game, obviously. But it looks like they're going higher tech with a lot of the costumes, kind of like his movie iterations now. The combat in the game is really good. It reminds me of Arkham, the Arkham series of games, but it's a little different. Instead of triangle being the react and dodge, it's circle, and that's a little difficult to get used to. But it's still the combat look and feel is a lot like the Arkham games, which the Arkham games pretty much perfected combat, and you throw in being able to use your web shooters and all these other powers that Spider-Man has that Batman doesn't have. You get a lot of variety there, and it's really cool to see the combat, and I'm hoping as I progress I'll unlock more cool moves and things to do with the webbing. I just haven't gotten there yet. Another cool thing is instead of running the Daily Bugle, J. Jonah Jameson has a podcast, which as a podcaster, it's kind of funny to see. And like it to me, it's like this perfect thing in the game that's what Jonah would do. I'm not sure if, that's what's going on in the comics right now, but like thinking as newspapers are failing, like what would J. Jonah Jameson do with his time? That's it. He'd have a podcast. He'd have a over the top, let's throw Spider-Man under the bus every chance we get. Podcast that millions of people listen to, and it's just kind of funny to see that thrown in there. The best thing though about Spider-Man PS4 is there's no better way to get around New York City or really anything than web swinging. Going back to the Spider-Man 2 video game for the Spider-Man 2 movie in the mid-2000s for PS2, like that kind of introduced the open world of New York and being able to swing around the whole city. I'm sure I'm not the only one that does this. You climb to the tallest building you can find. Most cases it's the Empire State Building. In some of these other games they've made it like the Oscorp Tower or something like that. And you just jump off and see how fast you can get going before you swing at the bottom. And, you know, the web swinging mechanics have just gotten better and better since Spider-Man 2, and it's so cool to just be able to explore that world in that way. Driving the Batmobile in the Arkham games is cool. Stealing cars and driving around in Grand Theft Auto is cool, but there is nothing that compares to web swinging. And the web swinging mechanics, just with the swinging in general, and then the web zips and the launches that you can do off of buildings and things like that, it just works perfectly, and they got it right. And it seemed like some of the earlier, the Amazing Spider-Man games that they developed for PS4 couldn't quite get the web swinging right. They almost tried to use too many buttons to get it working. You had to use both triggers sometimes to get both hands going, and it didn't always work for me. But this one for PS4 gets it right. It's perfect. It's just awesome swinging around this city. That's really all I've got on Spider-Man today. We covered a lot of ground with Spider-Man. Thank you for listening. If you love Spider-Man, there will probably be more Spider-Man in the future because, as I said in the podcast, Spider-Man's my favorite superhero, and I'm going to want to dive deeper and deeper as I progress through the comics, and probably through this game I'll have more points that I want to come back on. Thanks for listening. Be sure if you're on iTunes to rate and review whatever platform you're on. Hit that subscribe button. And if you want to donate to the podcast to help me out with hosting costs and other costs that go into building a podcast, I am not J. Jonah Jameson. I need some help. Hit up the Patreon. It's patreon.com/podcastaboutSomething. And I always love hearing feedback through Twitter at APASomething or through email, a podcastaboutSomething@gmail.com. Stay classy.